Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conversations with Matt DeLockery. Sorry for that brief delay. For whatever reason, my Wi Fi wasn't connecting and it just wasn't letting me start. So that's sorted out now, and we're good to go. So today we're going to do the third and final part in our series on faith. First, we looked at Christianity and blind faith. Then we took a look at what was required for true faith. And today we're going to look at what it looks like to have faith and live like it, live faithful lives every day. Now, without doing an exhaustive study on faith, I can think of two main ways that we all have to live by faith in our daily lives. The first one is one that happens to all of us, and it's really common. The second one may or may not happen to everyone, but even if we all experience it, it's definitely less common. So let's start with the main way. We all have to live by faith, and that's trusting that God actually cares about us and will work everything out. Let me give you a couple scenarios in which this really makes itself clear. Um, so, from time to time, we all find ourselves in situations which we can go one of two different ways. We can either do things the right way, or we can cut corners and do things in a way that benefits us. We can either do things the way they should be done, or we can manipulate them a bit so that we come out ahead. Now, this doesn't seem like much, but in a really subtle way, we're putting ourselves over those around us. We're acting selfishly and treating ourselves like we're the most important people around. And by cutting corners or not doing things as they should be done, we're improving our situation at others' expense. We're lifting ourselves up by pulling others down. So that's one way of looking at this first type of faith that I'm talking about. Let me give you another way of looking at it. Suppose someone you know, maybe not even someone you're friends with, but someone you know is being mistreated. Your options are one, you can stand up for them, or two, do nothing. If you go with option one and stand up for them, you run the risk of something negative happening to you. Nobody really likes when the crowd doesn't generally like it when you stand up to them, and there will very likely be consequences. But in this scenario, even if you succeed and stop the negative thing happening to the person that you barely know, nothing positive is going to happen to you. However, if you go with option two and do nothing, then nothing bad will happen to you, but the mistreatment will continue. So the question is, do you stand up for this person or not? Do you risk losing something yourself when you have nothing to gain? And there's no other reason to do right? There's no other reason to choose this option other than to do right and help somebody. Do you still choose it anyway? I think we all know what the correct answer is, but living it out is a bit more difficult. And those are just two scenarios, two ways of looking at this one thing. There's hundreds more like them. What they all have in common is that from time to time, we're going to be put in situations where we have to choose between doing the right thing and the wrong thing. And the right thing is easy to do when it looks like there will be good consequences. But what happens when there will be bad consequences for doing the right thing? What then? At that point, it's time for faith. First, we have to trust that God will take care of us when we do the right thing and bad stuff happens to us because of it. Because sometimes those scenarios force us to have to make decisions where doing the right thing could cause us to lose big. And in those situations, we may have nothing or no one to rely on but God. And we're going to have to trust that He's going to take care of us. Second, we're going to have to trust God that following the right path is worth it. There's a reason why there's temptation to follow the wrong path, because the wrong path is almost always the easy path, and it often looks like it's going to work out a lot better, certainly in the short term. And we would choose the wrong path, I think, far less often if it were harder than the right path. If the right thing was easy, why wouldn't we choose it? The thing is, the right path is usually harder, and it often doesn't pay off anytime in the near future, and sometimes not even during this life. If we're going to follow God, we're going to have faith that this path is actually worth it, because we often won't see it. So that's something that we all have to deal with. Sometimes it's occasionally, sometimes it's regularly, but we all have to deal with choosing the right path or the wrong path. And choosing the right path requires faith. But there's another situation that's not so common, and it requires faith. Actually, it requires a lot of faith, and that's stepping off the path entirely. So everything we've talked about so far has been about a right path and a wrong path, or a high road and a low road. And both of those options are pretty clear. One's good and one's bad, but they're often pretty clear. Every so often, and maybe or maybe not with every person, we'll be walking down the path and God will say something like, turn left here. And you'll be like, God, there's no road here. It's just woods. And God says, trust me, turn left right here. Most of the time, most of us follow the standard paths, either good or bad. And that's why they're the standard paths. But every so often, God will want to take us somewhere different, somewhere conventional wisdom will not get you. And because conventional wisdom will get you there, the path you will be taking will actually look unwise. I mean, after all, if conventional wisdom doesn't get you there, then it's not going to look wise. That's sort of what it means. This is what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. Sight is the same as wisdom. You can see where you're going, it makes sense. I mean, it might be difficult, but you can see where you're going and you have a reasonable idea of what's out in front of you. Walking by faith and not by sight means you can't see what's in front of you. You can't use conventional wisdom to get where you're going. The only thing you have to rely on is God's voice. If you turn left when God says turn left, you're going to be headed out into the woods with no map, no path, and no help. You have to completely trust that God is going to guide you when and where you need Him to. Now, you see extreme examples of this in the Bible. Think of the prophets and the apostles and people like that. They did things that made people think they'd lost their minds, but they believed they were following God. And all they had to go on was faith that God would show them what steps they needed to take when they needed to take them, because they couldn't see where they were going. When God calls people today to walk by faith and not by sight, it's generally not quite to those levels, but it's the same idea. It's hearing from God and then following wherever He sends you, even if it doesn't make any sense. I do need to be clear about one thing, though. When God sends you on a path like this, God initiates it. You don't just get to decide to go off and do some crazy thing and trust that God will take care of you. If you go off on your own, you will fail because God's not guiding you. To do this correctly and for it to actually work out for something positive, that doesn't necessarily mean your success, that just means something positive. God has to be the one to initiate the call. He's the one who says, turn left. You don't just get to decide, I want to turn left. I want to reiterate, though, this is not common. It happens, but it's not standard operating procedure. Most of us, most of the time, will have to choose between the right path and the wrong path, to trust God to take care of us and trust that the difficulty of following the right path is worth it. But I wanted to let you know that the other thing is there because it's a part of living faithfully, even if it's not something that everyone has to do. So, anyway, that's living faithfully. Start typing out your questions. And if you have any comments about this topic that aren't even a question, you just want to share an opinion, please share those as well. First question: how do I explain to non believers what living faithfully really means? Quite often they have very distorted views. Part of the reason I think they have distorted views is because Christians um, have been misinterpreting or misexplaining faith. Like, not just they explain it wrong, but they understand it wrong. A couple weeks ago, when we talked about blind faith, that's part of it. We tend to explain it as trusting something that you don't have reason to believe in, or just unbelieving things without any evidence. And you can understand why people, you know, non-believers don't get it because, well, that's not really faith. That's something the Bible specifically says you're not supposed to do. So explaining it well is part of it, but the other part of it is um, the other part of it is you. I've lost my train of thought. It means quite a, oh, living faithfully only makes sense if there's actually good reason to believe that everything that we believe in as Christians is actually true. So if there is no God, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then it doesn't make any sense. If you can explain some of those things to them, why there's actually good reason to believe in Christianity, then it's like, okay, well, now you're trusting in this being that is there and does seem to interact with us. And so it's not just you're trusting in some dusty old book that was written thousands of years ago by men in long robes because they wanted to control people or get their money or whatever. That's a really lousy reason to have faith. But if there actually is this being and he does interact with us and he's doing something in the world, all right, well, then that actually does make sense. So that's a good, that is a good place to start, both of those. Explaining why blind faith isn't a thing, and then showing why there's actually good reason to think there is a God who interacts with us and talks to us. Second question: how can we know when we're being asked to turn left? So how do you know when you're being asked to take one of those crazy paths? Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that it's not common. So generally, it's not happening. But when it does, I think part of it is it's not often going to be a desire that you have. It's not like oh, I want to go this way. Oftentimes when God's calling you to do something like that, it's not going to be something that you want to do. Or maybe you think you do, and then you get going, and you're like, oh, this isn't it. So, and that gets into like, when do you actually hear from God? Because most of the time, conventional wisdom will get you to most places. Like if you read your Bible, you try to understand what God's telling you. His general commands will cover all of your general situations, and so you don't really need a word from the Lord. You don't need any sort of a special message. He doesn't give those out very often because there's no need to. But when he does, the reason is because your path is about to get really, really difficult. Because why would you need a special word from the Lord unless it's going to take something like that to keep you on the path? So it'll be pretty clear if he's telling you to do something. The other side of that is if it's pretty clear that he's telling you to do something, you can expect that difficult times are on their way, because he wouldn't just give you some special revelation on, I want you to go do this, unless it's going to be difficult. And getting in examples of that will take more time. But yeah, so that. Other questions? Oh, question: what are ways we could help others to live faithfully? It all starts with doing it yourself. We're not supposed to so much be concerned with trying to help others to be on the right path. It's more of, we follow the right path ourselves and inspire others to want to do the same. And then if and when they're like, I want part of what you're doing, then you explain, this is how things have worked for me. So it's not like you're trying to get other people to do it. Focus on doing it yourself. And then once you've done it yourself, then as others ask, then you can explain to them how you've been doing what you've been doing. But if they're not asking, then don't worry about it. Just keep on going, keep on doing what you're doing, and focus on that. So self first, and then others only after they've been asking. Comment for me personally, knowing about those left turns is when I keep getting nudges from God. He is nothing if not persistent. Yeah, we have a tendency to tendination. What kind of word is that? We have a tendency to ignore God a lot. There's a whole book of the Bible, Jonah, about that. God's like, go here. Jonah's like, yeah, I'm going the other way. I don't like that. Yeah, the further comment on the one that I just read, and it's normally stuff I absolutely don't want to do. Yeah, that's really what it is. That goes back to a previous question. How do we know when we're being asked to turn left? It's usually going to be for something you don't want to do. So God has a habit of doing that. Yeah, just like Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh, and his reasoning was like, these are awful, awful people, and they deserve wrath. And I know that if I go there and I preach to them, they're going to repent and God will forgive them. And I don't want God to forgive them. I want God to smash them because they're awful and did awful things to my people. And you can understand that. I mean, they've done awful things to his people, and he wanted some justice. And God's like, no forgiveness. And Jonah's like, yeah, I'm gonna get on the ship and go the other way because I don't want to do this. And then big fish. And so, yeah, God, if God really wants you to do something, He's not gonna let you ignore it. It's not gonna be a question of, well, I wasn't sure about this, because he'll keep poking at you until you can get him to go away. But you have to pretty much acknowledge, I'm trying to make God leave me alone. And you have to really bite the bullet and be like, leave me alone, God. And then he will, but that's not really what you want. Um, Question: what are some unique ideas beyond what we typically hear in church? You Unique ideas about what? How to uh, live faithfully? How to expand further on that question, please, and I'll respond to it. Unique ideas on living faithfully beyond what we hear in church. Um, I don't know that in this situation you need a bunch of unique ideas. I do unique ideas on a whole bunch of things like all the time. That's what I do. I rarely follow the standard path, but and this one is more like, you're supposed to diet and exercise. Do it. I mean, there's little tricks here that you can do this, or a little bit of this or that, but but at the end of the day, get up, go to the gym, try to eat food that doesn't come through a window, and if you turn the when you're at the grocery store, you turn things over, and if you can't pronounce most of the things on the ingredients list, it's not food. Put it back. So things like that. Just you know what you're supposed to do. You need to do it. Um, Most of the ideas you typically hear in church um, are probably going to be pretty good on this one. So, and I don't praise church a lot, but here's one where it's good. So they'll tell you to do things like read your Bible, pray, and get involved and talk with other people who are Christians, especially if they're older and have walked this path before you. Um, Start listening to them, ask them for advice, be in groups where you tell them, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I'm struggling with, getting accountability. All of those things are excellent. The hard part is doing them. So do them. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but that's the answer. Alrighty. That looks like the end for the day. Thank y'all for showing up, and we'll move on to a new topic next week. See ya.